Welcome back to the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast with your host, Luke Boyron. Today, I'm interviewing Jonathan Wallace. Jonathan is a real estate investor and a realtor based out of Midland, Ontario. He works in the Simcoe County area and around Midland. Now, Jonathan has listed and sold several properties for me and my company so far, and he's excellent to work with. He works with a lot of investors. Like I said, he invests himself. So he's been a useful resource for us to have in that local market, including recommending, some local electricians, trades when we need them, things like that. And he's been able to help us a lot with us selling these at a distance. So Jonathan has experience with getting into some complicated investment properties himself as well. And him and I often have phone calls and we chat about things that are going on in the market and things that we're doing on our properties and opportunities we see. So I thought you'd want to see a little bit about how some of our conversations go and some of the things that we're thinking. Jonathan talks about the investments he's done, the opportunities he sees in the market. We do talk a decent amount about renovations as well. But overall, I think this is a really interesting call or a really interesting recording for you guys to listen to. So listen up and take care. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me, Luke.
So tell me a little bit about your background, like what you do before real estate.
Oh, that's a really good question. Basically got myself in a position where I did a victory lap in high school, did a few of those kind of jobs where, you realize quickly that you're not meant for working in a factory kind of lifestyle. So I went back to college and got a job, basically came out of college with a film and television degree, jumped into working for one of Canada's largest broadcasters for 15 years, and then found myself in kind of a weird spot where everyone was getting laid off. And I was seeing all the people that I kind of aspired to be getting packaged out or, early retired and then scrambling to find skill sets in another field. I just didn't want to be that person. So jumped into real estate about 6 years ago with kind of the back against the wall, no real experience other than owning a few investment properties, and then just kind of went all in on myself.
Nice. And I know you're in the Midland area now. Is that where you're from? And is that where kind of you've always done the stuff?
Yeah, really good question. So my dad was a fighter pilot in the Canadian military. So I've lived in almost every province. He retired in Southern Ontario in Wasaga Beach, and Midland was kind of an opportunity through a network. I'd done some mission trips in the Dominican Republic and met the rainmaker on my team. So that's kind of how I ended up in Midland. It was kind of one of those coming home. You never say you're going to come back, but the city lifestyle just didn't really seem to resonate anymore. I lived in downtown Toronto and was really looking to make kind of a shift lifestyle-wise and spend more time with my parents and kind of just live entrepreneur lifestyle.
Oh, I get that. I mean, I was living downtown Toronto and moved out to Ottawa for a bit of a slower pace of life for sure. Yeah, so totally. Definitely get that.
My commute to work is the same no matter what the weather or conditions are, so it's great.
Yeah, that's true. It's not reliant on the traffic in Toronto, which is, definitely being in real
Toronto. Wow.
Exactly. And being in Toronto, it just leads to so much sitting in traffic. But and there's the other side, of course. Toronto has so much to do, but in your day to day, it's sometimes nice being out of the city for a bit. So you had some investment properties earlier, and then you got into real estate as a real estate agent. So, for the listeners, you're part of a real estate agent team up in Midland. What areas do you operate in?
We essentially service all of Simcoe County. I mean, with today's technology and the availability of data, you can really list a property anywhere. But at the end of the day, we really try to focus on Simcoe County within about an hour and a half of the Midland area.
Nice. Okay. So Jonathan, you've listed now several properties for my company. You sold several for us. Did we sell that second mobile home yet? Haven't sold it.
We're working on that bad boy. The mobile home, for those that are investing, that it's interesting because there's a lot of money that can be made. the challenges that you're working within the rules and regulations of the park. So that can be a bit treacherous at times on getting a deal to come together and, see it.
And absolutely, mobile homes bought right can be profitable as flips too, but there's some dangers to them. I did a mobile home out in Cultus Lake, BC. I don't know, hour and a half outside of Vancouver. And we were selling it. Now, the spread was amazing on it. We got an amazing deal buying it. Quick reno, and then we're selling it. When we sold it, it fell out of contract several times. And one of the reasons was the park, the mobile home park, was letting buyers know they were planning on selling the park in the next 5 years. And technically, if leases end at the end of that, the new park owner may decide to redevelop the land without it being a mobile home park. And you could have an old mobile home that isn't worth moving and no park left to put it in.
Yeah, you're definitely seeing these mobile parks move from like 99-year leases or 21-year leases to like 1-year terms. And you're not wrong. It definitely puts the owner potentially in a little bit of a precarious situation because you never know the intentions of the seller of the actual park. And it's true, you're essentially paying, 6 figures for a property that in theory you could probably buy for about $80,000 brand new. So it's definitely an interesting dynamic. At the same token, you get some great opportunities though to own a house.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm putting this out there because I've never done it. And I actually think this is a smart hustle, is finding parks where homes sell for high values and then seeing if you can have a relationship with the park. So if an old home gets moved out, that you could bring in a new home and then sell it. Because like you said, you could possibly buy a used home that's, under 10 years old, depending on what the size we're talking about and things like that. But, $100,000 to get that all in, or maybe under 200 to get an all in brand new one, depending on what you're putting in, of course, again. But then that brand new home in a park might sell for $300,000-$400,000. And all you're doing is having a relationship with a park and making sure they let you know when there's a spot available for homes. So I think, assuming the parks don't do it themselves, I think there could be an opportunity there.
Yeah, I think that could be a total win-win because ultimately you're raising the value or the future value of their park if they ever decide to turn it.
Yeah. And I know we're not necessarily here to talk about mobile homes, but you're selling your second one for us, and you sold one for us last year that did very well. And of course, like you said, got to warn the audience, all of these, they takes multiple times to sell them because financing is harder for the buyers to get. The park's got rules. We actually got sold the recent one at a very good price. And then they had more pets than the rules would allow. Even complicated because they technically didn't, but the park decided not to approve them anyways because the park has to approve every owner. So it can be difficult to resell these. So make sure, for the listeners, if you're going to flip one of these, make sure you've got enough of a spread on it because you may have to hold it a little longer than you were expecting or sell it for a little less. But again, if the spread's there, and it has been on ours, it's worth it. And you've sold some other properties for us, and I know, kind of sold across from like Tiny Township, Midland, across to Aurelia for us. So, some rundown properties, some fixed up properties. You sold a bit of a mess of properties for us. Do you have a kind of specialty that you work with? Do you work with a lot of investors, or do you work with a lot with homeowners, or?
You know what? I think in the real estate business, what happens is you become kind of a master at everything. I wouldn't say that I have one specific niche. I really feel like my niche is just problem solving. The idea is that I can help more than one person, but obviously living in cottage country, we do deal with waterfronts. We deal with a little more farm, more vacant lots. It's very unique where I live and work is kind of a melting pot of all different styles of real estate. So it's not like you're in downtown Toronto where you're dealing with commercial, multi-res and then your traditional house. It's like there's vacant lots, there's waterfront, there are mobile parks, multi-res. So it's a nice mix where I get to live and play. So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you need to you need to be able to have the skill set to figure out all of those things. And same thing for even if you're a real estate agent in downtown Toronto who specializes in condos, you're still going to have things that you need to become an expert in. It's like, oh, condos, that's easy. Yeah. But then you know all of the different, condo complexes, which ones have issues, the new projects that are coming up. So you have to become a specialist in what you do, regardless of where you are, whether that's condos or, a wide assortment of properties up in cottage country. So for sure.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that some of that is just in repetition, right? It's kind of one of those things they say, 100 hours. If you spend 100 hours working on something over 365 days, which is only 18 minutes a day, you'll be better than, I think it's 85 or 95% of the world at that specific thing. But yeah, I think it's just repetitions. The more repetitions I've done, the better I get at it. And I'm not afraid to take on new challenges. I think that's for the listeners out there. It's like, take on those new challenges and go all in.
Absolutely. So you talked about owning investments before getting into real estate investment properties. Tell me a bit about that, and then we'll get into kind of what investing you do now.
Okay, great question. So I was working for kind of like a top 50 employer in Canada, had steady employment, and the whole idea was, okay, I can't afford Toronto. At that time, I really couldn't even afford Barrie as an investment property. I was going to lose money. So I really looked at it as, how am I going to own a piece of property and kind of start to build some equity? So really how I cast my net was, how can I buy something in a community that A, I can afford, B, will be somewhat profitable. And I'll be quite honest, the first property that I purchased, I knew the arena in town because I had refereed there before. Other than that, I really had no clear understanding of the area. All I did to myself was, this is a place that I can afford. It's got 2 units. I did some real quick market research. I found a property that I thought would work for me and my goals. I threw up an ad on Kijiji at the time, basically with no photo, kind of a coming soon describing the property. And within 24 hours, I think I had about 30 to 40 people applying for the property, and went, okay, I think this market's going to work for me because it doesn't look like I'm going to have any challenges making my mortgage payment with the rents that I can kind of net from this property. So went up, saw it, pulled the trigger, got financing, and it's still in my portfolio. It still does very well. Maybe some of those deals, in 2018 were a little better, where I was cash flowing between $1,000 and $1,200 a month. But never planned to live there ever.
Yeah. Where is that property?
It's about 6 minutes from my house now in Penetanguishene.
Okay.
So, and it's funny how sometimes in real estate investing, you stumble into deals that make financial sense, and you had no anticipation that it's like, wow, my first multi-unit was in Penetanguishene. I could barely spell it, let alone pronounce it. And it was a cash flowing venture. It's still in my portfolio. It's a cute bungalow, all brick in a really nice neighborhood. And the spread's good. I haven't got to the point where I've refinanced it, because I really am a firm believer that you try to, the more equity you can keep in these things, that whole concept of just leveraging to the max to, double down on other properties. It's helped me weather the storm by having that and keep the mortgage payment down, because when it went from 3% to 7%, like a lot of investors out there, I didn't lose my shirt. I wasn't forced to sell it. I still had enough cash flow to keep the lights on.
Nice. Yeah. Speaking of interest rates, there's, we're recording this on May 28th, 2024, and there's an interest rate announcement on June 5th. So, I think they were predicting about a 60% chance right now, or at least a few days ago. That's what I was looking at of the first interest rate reduction. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers on that, because that's going to help our business and my rentals. I have a bunch of rentals on variables as well. So it'd be nice to see it start trending down. I think inflation hasn't come down as hard as they were hoping, so we'll see. But I'm kind of hoping we see a small rate reduction, and that it that it bring a lot of buyers back into the market to kind of get in before the craze, right? So I'm hoping that's what we see for my wholesale business, for my flipping business as well, right?
Totally. And I think just being stable here has created some buyer confidence. Definitely seeing it in the real estate market as just my day-to-day business. That buyer confidence is back. I think the media portrayal of where they are projecting the market to go is probably the biggest conversation pieces within the conversation of buyers. Is, nobody wants to buy something to find it worth 20% less. But I think now the conversation is very much now is probably the best time for a buyer to jump into the market, because it's, we've got houses in our area that are back under $500,000 that are maybe, hopefully achievable to some. Still too high for most, but, there's some opportunities to kind of jump into that space and hopefully, ride the wave down.
Yeah. 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 And I do find there's opportunities. Sometimes I see now legal duplexes that sometimes make sense to buy just off the bat. But I do think, and when people are doing conversions to multi-units, I think it often now can make sense to convert directly from 1 to 3 units as well. Because of the rules that, across the province that are now allowing 3 units on a property within one property. I think like the bungalow that we sold in Aurelia would have made a great triplex. Would have been very easy to do. Or the one that's going to go out to my buyers list probably today or tomorrow in Ottawa. It's a semi-detached 2-story. I think that could turn into 3 units, 1 unit per floor. And 3 2-bedroom units. It's near college. So I think there's opportunities there now there's the coach houses, and I've built a couple of them where you have a duplex in front and then a coach house out back, which is cool as a 3rd unit. But I think I really like taking the existing space and dividing into smaller units. And just because the construction costs are so high right now. So if you can take kind of the same amount of space you have and you're already doing the renos, you're already running plumbing, et cetera, and divide that into an extra unit, I think.
It's literally like we have a lot of big lots in our area, and our team has really been focused on these coach houses. The challenge is to get them where you could build them for less than $250,000 is almost impossible. There's some kind of, there are some opportunities out there where they claim you can build it for $100,000, but the real challenge is like, by the time you do permits, you're $250,000. And I think the big challenge too is, how do you refinance them? There just isn't enough appraisal opportunities out there to say, okay, if you put a $250,000 coach house, that it improves the value by $250,000. Whereas a triplex, for example, not to say they're a dime a dozen, but anybody that's going to do an appraisal can easily say, well, here's 10 triplexes that have sold in the last 365 days. And it's a more tangible comp on your refi.
Mm-hmm. I do agree. And I do find, newly renovated triplexes still don't do as well as they should on refinances, because most of the triplexes you're going to see selling are older ones. And so you don't get as much value as what you said, as you should. And I think there is an element, kind of what you talked about earlier, about leaving your equity in properties. Because I think this is one way to do it, is taking the equity you can out of other properties and then leaving it in certain properties that are going to provide enough cash flow. The coach houses you're seeing, kind of $250,000 to build one, what size are they?
They're usually somewhere in between, 900 to 1,100 square feet. Usually.
That's reasonable to build. And they must rent pretty well at those prices. I've built them smaller, and these are, in the city of Ottawa, smaller yards. One is kind of a small yard to fit it in. And I built one that's 420 square feet and one that's 450 square feet. And they've cost me under $200,000 to build, which sounds like it should be less for the size difference. And in theory, it should be, but there's a lot of things, like you said, just to get them built. So you need a survey, that's $5,000, permit drawings and application, you're several $1,000s into the design work. And then you're trenching to hook up your plumbing, splitting your electrical meters, all of that kind of work already is expensive. One of them I built on a poured slab foundation. The frost line here in Ottawa is 5 feet. And because of, setback issues, we had to do vertical frost protection for a slab. So a slab on grade construction just meant digging down along the sides and having to vertically go with foam to keep underneath from freezing. Just extra requirements in the city of Ottawa that added a lot to the cost. But the one I built, I think the second one, 450 square feet, built it on helical piles with insulated floor package, yep. Which is, a nice permanent foundation that's going to be super solid, but but saved money on that. It cost about $180,000. I rent it for $1,700 or $1,750 or $1,725, over $1,700 a month, right, on $180,000 build. So it's really not bad return on the money for building it. And I do want to work. There's certain situations where you don't have the same limitations as the city of Ottawa. I have a property out in Rockland that it's a nice raised bungalow in front with 2 driveways. It has a double driveway and a single that drives to the back. And it's very large. It's got a ton of room to build, I think, what's going to be a 2-story house. I'll probably build it with a half walkout basement that acts as the main story and then a second floor on top of that. And I think with the foundation being the floor and the stick frame for the rest, I think I'm going to be able to build it larger and cheaper. So I'm working on trying to find ways to build it cheaper. But I would say I agree with you for listeners. If you're just paying a construction company to build one of these, it's easy to get into 300,000 plus. And if you're renting that, for under 2,000, I don't think it's worth it. But if you are able to build them cheap enough, like you said, you're building these larger ones for 2,500, you may be able to rent that for well over 2,000 on its own, right? You're talking a full house. If you're building a 900 to 1,100, you're building a 2-3 bedroom house. So I think at that point, you're getting over 2,000 in rent, I assume. Yep. And so if you can refinance, for example, your other property that you've owned longer, and you end up just leaving the money for now into this property with the coach house, that may make it worthwhile. So you still have the equity saved somewhere, but it's just in a different property. You can kind of move it around. That's kind of my philosophy a little bit on saving the invested capital.
Yeah, I think in the tertiary markets, these coach houses, it's not like we have a long list of history of successful ones. So I think, in our market specifically, as people are a little bit hesitant, because if you do hit 250 to 300 after, the municipalities aren't doing it on a daily basis. So some of the red tape is quite long to kind of jump the hurdles because it's kind of new and no one wants to make a mistake at town hall. So I think there's a little bit of reluctancy from investors to kind of be the first guinea pig in a market because no one wants to lose their shirt, and rightfully so. So I think you're seeing those triplex conversions or duplex conversions being, a more tried and tested way of, guaranteeing some kind of return on investment.
Yeah, and for listeners, when I see a bungalow and I'm thinking about turning that into 3 units, I can see the main floor being divided into 2 units because then you don't worry about extra staircases. So if you have a direct entrance to the basement, you keep that. The basement becomes a 3-bedroom apartment. And then the main floor becomes, let's say, 2 1-bedroom apartments. An entrance off the back that you can just cut right through the wall where there was a window or something. And your main entrance in the front. And you divide that up into 2 units. And now you have a 3-bedroom apartment, 2 1-bedrooms. And depending on your construction costs, I think that can be, and the condition of the property you're starting with, right? Because if the upstairs is already really nice, you may not want to cut it up. But if you're starting with a house that needs a full reno anyways, you're better off, I think, turning into 3 units and getting that 3rd unit, the additional rent from the 3rd unit.
Yeah, I think anytime the more units, the more you're diversified. I mean, you hear some of the horror stories at the LTB about, tenants not paying. If one tenant isn't paying, you may be able to, weather the storm. But if it's a single family and they're not paying, you ain't going to weather anything. But the more units you have, if one's not paying, you're hoping that it's dispersed over the 3 units. Maybe that's, the pill to swallow is not quite as big.
Yeah, agreed. So you had those properties early on, and I know you've been doing different stuff with your investing now. Tell me a bit about what you've been doing lately.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was interesting this last year when everybody was kind of in that, like, now is a terrible time to buy real estate. Why would you ever want to invest in real estate as the market's going? And I think it was a really cool opportunity to kind of not be quite so saturated with, the investors that were kind of doing it as a side hobby, that, if they were 10% over budget, but the market was climbing at 26%, they looked like heroes no matter what you were doing. I think it's fair to say, Luke, and it kind of plays to your business model, is the money in real estate's made on the acquisition. So if you can acquire a property that's at maybe a depressed value, and I love your quote is like, the bigger the problem, the more money there is to be made. Is I feel like the properties that weren't selling were the ones that were a bit rough around the edges, but sellers were more motivated to move the product. So it opened up opportunities for, like, quote unquote received deals. So I think some of the market shift there was my last acquisition is, and we can talk about it a little bit later on the podcast, is it was interesting, but the motivation for the seller, and I was just more, I think personally, we had a conversation with a mortgage broker that was doing lifts at kind of the multi-res, more of the apartment building style, was like not being afraid to pay a tenant to leave. Like, and the conversation was really interesting. And this is where maybe my shift changed to be more aggressive. Was he made a comment that was like, I've paid up to $40,000 for a tenant to leave. And of course, like, there's forums out there on what, a tenant's, might cash for keys might look like. But I really just budgeted that kind of concept in, was like, I've got a unit here that could be turned over. I'm going to try to purchase it at a price that makes sense to me, knowing that I'm going to factor in some kind of potential buyout. And if the spread makes sense, I'm going to jump on it. And so that it was just being a bit more aggressive, and that whole concept of, like, if you don't ask, you won't know. So it was just being a little bit more purposeful on the hunt for the next property, and not being scared that, with the kind of the noise around you, that now's not a good time to pursue, real estate. I just didn't buy into that, and I, found myself with
I agree that, people say now is not a good time, but because of that, you then end up with less competition. And I mean, that's kind of actually the first few deals that you and I did together. Those ended up being deals that, a few of them at least, that I had bought off of other wholesalers. For the listeners, they should know that I wholesale real estate, buy it discounted and assign it to other investors. I less now, but there was a point there where I was buying from other wholesalers because a lot of flippers and investors weren't actively buying. And so my competition died down, but I still have my business to run. I still have, company overhead and employees that I want to keep employed. So I was looking for opportunities to keep flipping as well. And with other investors not competing with me on wholesale deals, there was a few good deals out there. And that's where, we seized a few of them. And the first couple that you sold for me were wholesales that I had bought from other investors. So yeah, definitely the opportunity there. And same thing, I see it on the MLS sometimes too. Especially the stuff, unfortunately, most agents who send me deals, or my team deals, where they're sending us stuff that's priced low intentionally for multiples. And that's usually not going to work because everyone's going to see it. But the ones that work kind of best are, ones that, haven't hit the market yet. They're getting ready to list. Like one I bought not far from where I live. Realtor brought it to me because another realtor in her brokerage was about to list it for the seller. And as the seller was, an older seller, they were starting to clean furniture out of the basement. They found a ton of mold. Just black mold. The basement had been leaking, and it was under the furniture and carpet for a long time. And they didn't really use the basement for a long time. So there's just black mold that, all over the basement. And they were like, what do we do? And I said, well, I'll buy it. So that realtor knew that I buy those types of properties, brought me in to see it. This was because, like I said, I live close and I'm involved with the flips in the Ottawa area. So I went to go see that one myself. We made an offer. The seller gave me a big hug for taking the stress off of her shoulders, letting her leave whatever she wanted in the house, that kind of stuff. And we took care of the mold. That basement's beautiful now, by the way. That one's on the market to sell. But yeah, I think that's one way that realtors can, that I find good deals for realtors. And the other one is more properties that have issues that are sitting for a long time. And then there's, or are sitting for a bit, but then the seller's circumstance changes, or they start realizing, okay, I've been asking too much, or, this isn't going to work. And typically that is combined with something wrong with the property as well. That scares off a lot of buyers. In certain areas, we'll deal with foundation problems and things like that. And that scares off a lot of buyers. And so we'll take care of that. And that helps. So, yeah.
No, that makes sense. And I think if there was a tip that I could share with the listeners is, even as a realtor, I would find some local experts on areas that you want to invest in, because there's usually pocket listings or exclusive listings of sellers that have motivation but may be embarrassed about having the property listed, or they don't want to sign, or they don't want the neighbors to know. Don't be afraid to make those phone calls to, the movers and shakers in a market and say, what do you have that no one else knows about? Because that's, that is where some of the fruit is lying. So don't, I always say this to my investor clients is, listen, if you can get a deal somewhere else, I'm not going to be offended. So there's loyalty in this business, but I also understand that the profit margin is going to carry you to where the fruit is. So if it's not me today, I hope that it is tomorrow, that I'll be able to share that pocket listing with you that maybe doesn't make it to realtor. So as an investor, start hunting. The deals don't typically just land on your desk and it's kind of, the home run slam dunk deal. If you don't go looking for it, if you're not very purposeful in your conversations to say, here's what I'm looking for. Because at the end of the day, what I can speak just for our profession is, I'm going to take deals to people that I know are going to close on them first. It's how many calls do I have to make to make this product move? And if I know that every time I call you and say, hey, I've got a cool opportunity, and you say, I want to hear more about it, and you start to close on them, then the pipeline just comes straight to you. Mm-hmm. But that's all about the communication between you as the investor and the realtor. It's I know that my seasoned investors, the ones that are making big spread and do very well for themselves, aren't just talking to me.
Yeah. And you know what? That's something that I've almost forgotten about, because I've been doing this so long, but I do understand. I mean, first of all, I very much understand loyalty, but when I started, I understood a lot of realtors wanted to be kind of the exclusive realtor that I work with ever, and that just doesn't work with my business model and the size of the business I have, obviously. But I am loyal to the realtors I work with in the areas that I work with them. And also, if a realtor brings me a deal, I also will list with that realtor, almost always, unless there's a reason not to. But typically, if a realtor is going to introduce me to a deal, find a deal for me, they're going to get the listing on the back end, as well as, potentially commission or however they're making money on the front end. So that might be the exception where I'm loyal to, for example, I work with you in the area that I work with you. But if an agent were to bring me a property in your area and I trust them as a competent agent, then I would also list with them when I'm selling the property.
Yeah, I think that's like any good business owner is you're trying to incentivize your people. So there's nothing negative there in that experience. It's of course, if you can incentivize your contractors to do the job faster by making it worth their while, if you reward people, they'll come back to you.
Are you a savvy real estate investor looking to maximize your profits? Well, if you're buying properties off the MLS, you're not making as much as you could. The most lucrative way to boost your bottom line is by acquiring investment properties off market. By buying privately off market, you're able to save tens of thousands. Now, the problem is finding off market properties is really hard and takes a lot of time, effort, and money to do. Bliss is your number one source, delivering exclusive deals that you will not find on the MLS directly to your inbox. Bliss's extensive network and insider connections gives you access to properties that are not publicly listed and at a discount. We've helped hundreds of investors across Ontario and BC source the right properties at the right time for their portfolio. Buying assignable purchase contracts through Bliss at a discount helps facilitate higher returns, lower competition, and deals that align perfectly with your investment goals. From start to finish, Bliss's world-class team of real estate professionals makes the process seamless for all investors. If you're ready to elevate your real estate investment strategy, visit us at offmarketbliss.ca to join our buyers list and start receiving exclusive off-market deals directly to your inbox. The most profitable opportunities await, and they're exclusive to you and our valued buyers list members. For your next project, check out Bliss, the go-to source for off-market deals.
So you were talking about some of your more seasoned investors. Tell me a bit about what you're willing or able to share. Kind of what deals have they worked on? What are some cool deals they've done, or what are some things that they're up to these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. Without disclosing kind of who or what they are, I think some of the projects that we're working on right now is more on the development side of things, trying to turn 10 acres into 60, 70, 80 lots for future development. What I can say is, for those listeners out there, is Midland Penetang still has a lot of capacity. Penetang specifically is really progressive, I guess, and kind of eliminate some of the red tape. They want development. They're open to it if it's mutually beneficial to both parties. So some of the investing is actually more on the land amalgamation and development. And then, right now we're trying to work on a few sites for adaptive reuse opportunities, kind of converting like old, I don't even say old, but legacy buildings that were purpose built for example, long-term care facilities that we're trying to redevelop into 100-unit apartment buildings that are in those strategic growth patterns for the town. So investors, I think, are kind of the buy and flip folk for the most part have they've kind of disappeared a little bit because a lot of them got torched right at the end, kind of in mid 2022, maybe lost their shirts. So some of those ma and pa operations kind of disappeared, and now
or they're waiting on the sidelines, kind of.
Because it was really easy to it was really easy to look like an expert when the market was growing at such a rate that if you, like I was saying earlier, if you made a 10% margin error, it was kind of padded by the fact that the market was increasing by 36. So you could kind of weather those storms. Now what you're seeing is the real seasoned investors. It's always interesting as a realtor because you're trying to get the maximum dollar for a property, and the investor's always trying to quote unquote, blood in the water and steal something. But I think where the majority of the deals are happening is more on the creative financing side than anything else. You're seeing the vendor take back mortgages really start to kind of take over, where people don't maybe need the cash flow right away, but they want top dollar. And then you have sellers that have just become more realistic with market conditions. And if they want to sell, they're going to price it to sell. So we're seeing a lot more of that from the investor side, but people are still putting deals together. So don't let anybody tell you that there aren't deals out there right now, because people are buying, people are selling properties.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Well, with that, why don't we move on to the next segment of our show where we talk about the best and worst deals or your favorite and least favorite deals. Do you have a best or favorite deal in mind?
Well, I mean, financially, the best deal was the first deal because I got into the market. So don't be afraid to kind of start small. But, you know, my financially best deal is probably the most recent in the market conditions that were, you know, quote unquote bad. Took on a property that had some major structural issues, had tenants that hadn't been paying for what I would say is probably closer to a year. And the opportunity was there to kind of, as a younger opportunity or a younger person, by no means am I young, but certainly the seller was in a position where he was, you know, in retirement working, and he had actually offered it to the neighbors unbeknownst. And I didn't actually realize that. Because I could have paid less for it, but it was still a deal for me, in my opinion. But the spread was there. I took on some huge headaches. You know, the property had basically a septic tank underneath the house because the elbow into the municipal services had been leaking for, I don't know, a year, 2 years.
Oh, like we're just talking sewage. There isn't actually.
You know, I bought this property sight unseen. At a price that made sense to me. If I needed to tear the house down, at least I would kind of break even. And, you know, don't get me wrong, there was some major structural issues that, you know, I think most people wouldn't want to take on. But I was like, you know what? The old saying, like, no pressure, no diamonds, was like, I'll take on this responsibility. I've got energy. I've got some financial resources that allow me to take on a little bit of a project. And I bought it in kind of a season where everyone was, you know, the market was maybe a little bit slower on real estate. So I just kind of doubled down on where I could make money somewhere else. And that's be a fantastic opportunity. You know, I packaged the tenants out. They were happy. It was a nice hand up. They found new opportunities for them. We cleaned up the property. I mean, everything from foundation to exterior work to new electrical. But what's really cool about it is it's on a piece of property that has this like third unit that I didn't even know was there because there was trees around it. That likely at some point will be converted into a coach house. So financially, it worked out really well. You know, there was a lot of lessons to be learned along the way. And happy to share some of the learning. Sure. But, you know, I think in even the best deals, you still learn lessons. You know, some of the things that I learned just in that project was like, there's always another solution to a problem. And I know it sounds kind of like fairy tale land, but you know, I had quotes to do underpinning of the house at like $100,000. And the solution that I think is just as viable probably landed me somewhere around $23,000. So like, there's always another solution. There's always somebody else. In the trades right now, I think because it was so lucrative for so long, just like realtors, it was kind of a messy job. And I think people overquoted it just because they didn't want to put their staff through it. Actually, I found somebody that was like, I'll just do it myself. It's a quote unquote shitty job, but I'm willing to take on that responsibility, and we got it done.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that I do work with a lot of the contractors I work with that I have experience with. We work on kind of a day rate or an hourly basis, essentially. So I'm paying them for their time, because I do find when they don't know what the job entails, when there's too much messy stuff on some of these flips, yep, they end up sometimes overquoting or underquoting based on, you know, they'll usually overquote and price in a bunch of risk because they don't know what to expect. So they quote much higher. We're not sure what's going to happen here. They build in that risk. The other side of that, so obviously that would cost more. The other side is if they underquote and then they come across a bunch of problems, you might go with the underquoting person, but they may not finish the job. I've had contractors who underquoted who, start the work, drag it out a few months, and then leave because they underquoted and they're not getting paid enough to finish it, essentially. Even with a payment structure, they're just like, we'll just take a loss on our side and not finish this because we don't want to go through the rest of the work for what we paid. Or they'll come back to you with a bunch of, asking for a bunch of extra money. So those don't work great. So the model where we use hourly or we pay them for their time takes the risk factor out of it for them. However, you have to trust the contractors. You have to have, these need to be reputable, or you need to have experience with them. And because otherwise, they can be sitting around not doing anything or billing you for time when they're not there and things like that. So you need to be careful with that kind of stuff. But so that's one of the ways I deal with that kind of risk of they're not sure. And I know you've said messy in part because of the sewage, but also just the work itself can be, messy, and you start opening up floors and, we found some wood rot here and we weren't expecting that. So that kind of mess can add to your thing. And then you end up with a lot of change orders. And because they're already on site, the change orders can get, they kind of have you, they kind of have control over you, right? A little bit.
And it's interesting. I think if you're buying something that has a really sour onion, that time plus materials is probably the way to go to start the project. But one of the things that I did kind of realize maybe midway through the project is I would have preferred to do the time plus material and then repackaged or repositioned the trades to be on a more scope. Once it got to a more traditional, just cosmetic stuff, I probably would have preferred a quote, because, you're always running that mental framework in your mind where it's like, am I being taken advantage of when you do time plus material? Because there is no incentives, but definitely something that, is kind of new to me because I don't deal with projects on a global scale like you do on a daily basis making decisions, is, being decisive and telling people what your expectations are. It sounds really easy, but it's often hard to do. So just being very definitive in what your expectations are and not being afraid to create incentives for results. And I think if I could do it all over again on that project, even though it was very financially rewarding, is setting deadlines and timelines that are incentivized. Everybody is incentivized by money, but maybe it's not just money. Figure out what, play to the man or the woman that's working for you and incentivize them in ways that are going to motivate them to kind of give you their best.
Absolutely. Money's an easy one. If you finish, you get your day rate, or especially if you're possibly negotiating day rate or hourly, you negotiate down a little bit lower. I try not to negotiate their rates too often. You want them to be happy to be on site. But you say, if you finish by this day or, this time, then I will pay this much in bonus. And actually now you're higher than what you were asking for. Mm-hmm. That's still tricky because, again, if other things come up, you should add time for those things that come up, and then you're negotiating a little bit extra for that. But it's also smart what you were saying, figure out what they want, because maybe it's Leafs tickets, right?
Yeah. Or maybe it's time, or, they'd prefer, what I've noticed is that in some of the trades here specifically, they don't really love to work 16-hour days. They kind of want to maybe have a beer at the end of the day, or, help out their employees because the employee needs to take off because they don't have wheels. There's always interesting challenges that come up when you're hiring people to work with you. That, these are the things that I'm growing into, just being, I don't even want to say a boss, but more just a leadership role, to say people want you to be decisive. I think there's this element of trust, but you have to verify that they're actually doing what they say they're doing. And, my biggest mistakes sometimes are trusting that they'll do what I think is what I would do. And then when they don't do what I would do, it really just looks negatively on me, because I'm like, well, I guess I really wasn't clear on what my expectations were. So if they didn't do it the way I was expecting to do it, it always falls back onto me to realize that like, oh, I'm the problem.
Yeah. That's a that makes me think of two things. One is, for example, when we work with new contractors, we try to be very clear on how we pay, because pay is very important for contractors. We try to, make sure we pay on time. It's a sore spot if you don't, especially the first time working with them. A lot of contractors have been screwed, or, they didn't get paid for things. And some contractors will flip out at you if, you don't pay. Now, the other side of it too is, if you don't lay it out properly and have them agree and make sure they know what the payment structure is, some of them they finish a day of work and they're hounding you for payment right away. And that can be very frustrating, especially, we have a system for our payments. We pay, kind of on a certain schedule. We have a certain X amount of time to pay when we receive an invoice. And it's not a long time, but we're not paying same day invoices. That's hard for us to manage. It just gets hard to coordinate. And if you're able to, that's fine. But I find laying out, how you're going to, what the pay structure is going to be ahead of time can help quite a bit. Another thing too is when working with contractors for the first time, and this is whether you're hourly, daily, or quoted for the job, I think it's worth the cost of paying for internet at a house. We do wireless modems often with kind of SIM cards for it, but also if you're in the city, or can easily set up an inexpensive, reseller of cheap internet, because it doesn't need to be fast internet, and put up, a $50 Wise cam with a memory card in it or something like that. Just pointing at the driveway, if that's what you want. One, it gives security over the contractor and their tools, protects them. But also, you can go back and check the logs on when they were there. When was their truck in the driveway, right? And so if you're not sure, like if you just want to log that every day, they were there from this time to this time. Oh, weird. Why were they gone for 2 hours? Maybe they were picking up materials, but I'm not saying check everything, but having a camera there also just keeps them more honest when you're working with someone new, especially. So we don't do cameras on all of our job sites, but we try to.
Yeah, that's where I think the precedent is kind of set, is if you're going to take on that strategy of having cameras on your site, is make sure that they're there well before you've hired a contractor, so that you can kind of sell it to be that it's there to kind of mitigate their risk and everyone's risk, versus like, Uncle Sam's watching you. I think can be kind of an odd decision. At the same token, I've never been afraid to kind of just do those site visits. And I think of course, as the investor or the person that's maybe in the leadership role, always thinks that I could do that in 3 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours, but you have no idea what onions kind of, I think back to this project, and it's like, you leave and you think the demolition should take a day, and you get there and you realize, well, they actually had to demolish more things and like awkward angles, and it took way longer than I ever would have anticipated. But like, it's not as if, I never showed up on site and no one, everyone was just hacking darts and, drinking beers in the parking lot. Like, everyone's working. But I think we sometimes have, expectations of other people that we wouldn't do in our own house. So I think some keeping that as, these people are trying to work with you. They're trying to get you to your end destination. And, the biggest mistakes, or the things that, if in retrospect, I would do, is like, the biggest waste of time on a job site was me trying to be cheap. So then ultimately, when I'm trying to save a buck, it ends up making their job harder, and they would end up spending more money trying to do it the hard way. Whereas off the hop, I was trying to save $6,000-$7,000 on electrical to move the panels. And I'm, in my mind, I'm like, maybe I could find a cowboy that's going to come in. They'll do it without a permit. And you're thinking this way because you're like, I want to save $5,000 at the end. And then your contractor's trying to work with you, and he can't do everything he wants to do on the day he wants to do it because he's trying to organize trades. And in retrospect, I should have just paid the electrician to come in on the first day, because like I ended up with new service from the road, and yeah, it cost me $12,000, but like it's all new. I know the house isn't going to burn down, and it was done right. And now it looks good. The kitchen's where it should be versus making compromises because of where the electrical box was. So
Yeah, and not to mention the extra time. Because sometimes it's like, oh, I'll save money on this, but then you pay interest and carrying and lost potential profit and all of that. And you look at it, you're like, I spent so much more time, so much more headache. And yes, I saved the money here. I saved $5,000 here, but I paid $5,000 more in mortgage payments.
Yeah.
So that didn't save me money.
Or like complete frustration where like maybe those people that were working with you are no longer interested because you kind of just pussyfooted around the end product, and they're frustrated. So maybe on that next opportunity, they're going to add $5,000 because they know that you're going to kind of waste time, and no one likes to have their time wasted. And as a business owner, you don't want to waste someone else's.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the worst or your least favorite deal you've ever done.
I've been pretty fortunate with some of the decisions that I've made. Financially, I think the worst deals that I've had in business in general, they always can somehow spin back to like my decisions on not being clear with kind of what my expectations were, and not having decisive decision making. So I think, financially, I've always, put 20% down into properties. I've never really gone where it's, I've never gone to OPM, kind of like other people's money. I think that's, it's great for leverage, and it's great for building a really large portfolio. I'm just not sure that you always hold other people's money as accountable as you will your own. So like all my deals have been pretty good. Some have been better than others, but I've never, I've been fortunate. I haven't been burned yet. I'm sure I'll lose a bucket full of money at some point, but I've been lucky. Look, I haven't really had they've all been kind of trivial in the sense of just mistakes I've made. But I really can't pinpoint like, oh man, I really wish I never bought X.
Okay. And is there any of those mistakes you made that you think would be helpful for our listeners to learn from?
Well, I do. So, I think the biggest mistakes that I see just in investors in general is they try to stretch their dollar into every room. Anything that's worth doing, I think you try to do it well. There's nothing worse than, as a representative of a seller, is they've spent money renovating something that the buyer feels as though they have to rip up or redo. So if you're going to do something that's in the rental flip space, if you're not going to do it right, I'd almost suggest you just not to do it. Don't do it, because you're going to spend $5,000-$6,000 to jimmy rig the problem, and the next end user is going to come in and say, wow, this looks okay, but I'm going to spend $2,000 to rip it up and another $8,000 to do it right. That's probably the one thing that I could say from an investor on a rental flip project is, don't stretch your money through the whole house. Try to focus on what sells houses, the curb appeal, kitchens and bathrooms, and kind of like the living space. That to me, that's the area of focus. If you're going to spend money, focus it on those areas, and then let everything else go. Give the next homeowner some room to, craft it themselves. But if you're going to focus on something, do a room right.
Yeah. And I like to focus on things as well that stop people from buying properties.
Yeah.
Foundation issues, septic issues, roof issues. So sometimes it's like I'm doing the roof and fixing water damage, but I'm not making anything else pretty. But I'm just taking care of, or a crumbling foundation. I've done that where a basement wall fell into the basement. We had it shored up and rebuilt the basement wall and waterproofed and fixed, but it was a major issue. And we sold a century home that was completely unrenovated. But we took care of the thing that would have scared off all of our buyers otherwise. And sometimes that's worth it.
Yeah, I think if I could, wrap on that too, because I think that's a great, really amazing point, is like, you're looking to solve the deal breaker problems. What's going to discourage somebody from committing to the house? water, bad electrical, but flooring, not so much. Like, people can envision themselves on a weekend changing out the flooring, but the electrical panel on fuses, the first thing people are thinking is like the house is going to burn down, even though it's not factual. It's this weird perception that, they're going to have a problem, or they won't be able to get insurance, or whatever that might look like. So yeah, I can't agree more, is that, as a investor, if you focus on fixing the deal breaker problems, the rest usually can be dealt with by, someone in the family that's an expert that could take on that, those weekend warrior projects, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the final questions of our show.
Sure.
Questions we ask every guest.
Okay.
The first one is, and you can just be your first thought, quick response, but what has changed about your approach to real estate investing with your experience?
Just to be more aggressive, that, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I really am a firm believer that you're one good decision away from changing your life, whether that's in investing. Just make one good decision today that's going to move you towards your future goal. And I think that'll serve you well if that's your, one area of focus.
Nice. If you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you'd have for a younger you?
It's odd, but for the younger listeners out there, you're only as big as your parents' sandbox. And what I mean by that is your parents, they love you, they care about you, they want to protect you, they're your biggest advocate. But sometimes it's kind of like this isn't my situation, but my mom was a nurse, and then you become a nurse. Your dad was a lawyer, you become a lawyer. Your dad was a professional, you become a professional. Is sometimes they want you to take the safe route. And, if I could look back now, I'd say, there were some present decisions I made that affected my future plans I didn't know I had.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, think bigger. You have, if you're sitting at a mundane job right now, it's like, go all in on yourself, put a budget together that works on your, personal growth, and just kind of don't be afraid to, make some changes in your life. I went from having that cushy job with, defined benefits, and like, they all sounded great. And people are like, you're crazy. Why would you walk away from, holidays and this and paid overtime, and you could bank it in lieu? And I'm like, because it just wasn't rewarding. So if I could look back now, I just would have done it 10 years sooner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. People are limited by their sandbox. And I think there's a little bit of, that's one thing I kind of got from Grant Cardone's, I believe it's Grant Cardone's, the 10X rule, is it? His book, 10X. Just doing that kind of exercise where you try to think 10 times bigger than what you're actually aiming for now opens up your mind to, okay, well, if I were to do 10 times what I was planning on doing, how would I do that? Instead of, oh no, I can only do my 1 times. Okay. Or stretching for 2 times. But if I were to try to do 10 times, how would I do that? And it's not necessarily about doing 10 times to me. My interpretation, or the way I think about this, is it's more about opening up your mindset to what could be possible. Because if you don't think 10 times or anything close to that is possible, then you're limited. You're just trying to reach your 1-time goal. But if you aim for 10 times and only hit 3 times what you were going to hit before, well, you're still 3 times further along than you were going to be. So yeah, if you open up your mind, it's like, okay, well, I want to, if you're thinking, I want to buy 1 property a year for the next 10 years. Okay, well, what if I were to buy 10 properties a year for the next 10 years? What would I have to do? Okay, I need to get an assistant. I need to, find a way to raise money. I need to, have more relationships with brokers to source deals. And if you start doing all of that, now even if you don't hit the 10 properties a year you're planning on hitting, but you buy a few more, you buy 3 properties a year for 10 years, you're still 30 properties instead of 10. And if that's your goal, assuming, right? But that, I think that that's a way that allows you to get out of your sandbox or to kind of move beyond the sandbox you thought you were in or you were in.
And I think if I could just add to that, because I think it's so articulately said, is, if you're a young investor that's listening right now, because I'm sure we've got lots of seasoned investors going to be like, hey, thanks, I knew this 10 years ago. Thanks for repeating. And maybe they can resonate with the story. But for those of you, your young listeners that are maybe trying to jump into their first opportunity is, anytime I felt like I was stuck in a rut in my previous careers, it's, when I really look back and I really self-reflect on who I was at that time, is I made zero time for my own personal development. I didn't focus on it. It wasn't something that I thought of. I didn't read a lot of books on self-help. I didn't listen to podcasts that were all growth-based like this one. Even just that net time, like I used to listen to music. I can't remember the last time I was in my car or at the gym listening to music. It's all, and I know sometimes you could say like it gets to be a bit of a drone because it's like pick something and really focus on it. But I truly believe that the moment I'd made a decision that I was going to A, go all in on myself, and B, was going to take the time to invest the energy into learning the craft and kind of having some kind of strategy and that personal development loop, it got me in a different path. It allowed me to kind of think bigger, think larger than the sandbox that maybe I was playing in. And then I stacked some wins. The wins turned into momentum. And then all of a sudden your momentum starts to create value in other people's lives. And then you kind of get paid for it. But without taking that first step of maybe reading that book about investing or going to a mastermind, those are the pieces that are going to help you build the momentum. So just pick one thing that's going to move the needle forward. And I think if you keep, layering and stacking wins, like the sky is literally the limit.
Yeah. Awesome. Last question is, what is the most overlooked or the most overhyped investing strategy right now, in your opinion?
I think there's probably going to be a lot of naysayers that'll be like, you're just small-minded and like, you need to think bigger. I feel like and maybe it's just a bit of a limiting piece for me, and maybe it'll challenge me to grow, but this like other people's money. And I don't mean that in like borrowing or leveraging, for the next opportunity or finding opportunities that other people can grow in. But like the strategy of kind of like just fundraising for things that maybe don't turn out to be, you're kind of selling a lifestyle versus selling something that actually demonstrates a clear value proposition to the person that you're raising money for. Just seems to be a bit of a trap. I've had clients that are like, I feel like I got sold a bill of goods. I put up all the money. My active partner, for example, isn't executing the way that they were, and the value exchange is no longer there. So you just see some of those things maybe, I think anytime a market shifts, and I can speak even just from a realtor's perspective, is like when the market's going in one direction, I think everyone's super positive. The true warriors, I guess, is when times get tough, you see them kind of double down on their skill set versus kind of saying, well, like, it's not my money. So I don't know. This, maybe I know that fundraising is really important. I'm not suggesting that it's not, but I think the moment that you don't hold other people's money accountable like you would yours, that's probably, to me, the biggest downfall right now in what I'm seeing from, just from what I hear out on the streets, people talking.
Nice. Okay. I think that's great advice. I think it's something definitely to be wary of, people raising money or investing with others, to be very careful about it. So
just understand what you're doing. Like I don't buy stocks unless I understand what the company does. This whole like idea of getting rich quick, or it's like, if I don't understand the model, or you could sit me down and explain how I'm going to turn $100 into $150, and here's the timeline. If I don't get it, then I probably shouldn't invest in it. And that's, you know, I think that's probably important.
Yeah.
What do I?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jonathan, tell me, where can people follow you? Where can people find out more about you? And where can people reach out to you about your realtor side as well if people are interested in working with you?
That's great. So on Instagram, my handle's at Jonathan Wallace Real Estate. The team that I work on is Team Jordan. It's at Team Jordan First. My personal cell phone number, which I have no problem sharing because it's out in the universe anyways, it's 705-433-2525. You can hit me on any one of those. Feel free to give me a shout. I'm more than happy to share my expertise. If you're looking to list something, if you're looking to buy something in Simcoe County, more than happy to earn your business.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks for having me.